To play God and choose one.
Yes. Robert McFarlane, under oath, reveals his chilling choice, picking one American hostage in Lebanon to be swapped for a weapons shipment to Iran. Good evening. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. The disclosures from President Reagan's former national security advisor didn't stop there. McFarlane also detailed just how involved President Reagan was in getting around Congress for secret aid to the Nicaraguan rebels, also Mr. Reagan's secret policy and arms dealings with Iranians, and much more about Oliver North's secret White House basement operations. Again today, President Reagan denied any knowledge of lawbreaking. Phil Jones on Capitol Hill begins our coverage.
I regret, and I will continue to regret, the mistakes that I've made.
Robert McFarlane did indeed apologize for his involvement in the Iran-Contra scandal, but in the process, he may have caused bigger legal problems for Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. McFarlane disclosed details today indicating that North may have been involved in obstruction of justice after Attorney General Meese began asking questions in November of last year by shredding documents about the diversion.
What did he tell you about a shredding party?
Well, just that there had to be one.
McFarlane told about how President Reagan had directed that faith with the Contras not be broken, that aides should make continued efforts to help the Contras hold body and soul together until Congress would again agree to support them. McFarlane, who had served as President Reagan's national security advisor until December 1985, described an active president who even made a phone call to a Central American leader to free up confiscated weapons for the Contras.
Did you ask the President of the United States to speak to the head of state of that country to make sure that the Contras' arms were released to them?
Yes.
And was that successful?
Yes.
According to McFarlane, both the President and Vice President were well aware of contributions from foreign countries, including $32 million in donations from Saudi Arabia. McFarlane conceded today that suspicions about Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North should have led him to have asked more questions. McFarlane insisted that he had warned North against violating the Boland Amendment, which prohibited direct or indirect assistance to the Contras. Concerning the Iranian arms sales that turned into an arms for hostages deal, McFarlane told more details today about how the secret dealing went on and how he was asked to choose one American hostage to be released after the first U.S.-approved shipment of arms to Iran. McFarlane said he felt as if he were playing God, and he chose the American CIA station chief William Buckley being held captive in Beirut.
And it brought home to you, I take it, you know, what it really meant to be negotiating for hostages.
Well, it was very clear that this was not the kind of exchange that was proper.
However, as it turned out, Buckley was dead. The Reverend Benjamin Weir was the one released.
It certainly makes me feel very humble that I was chosen, and I also appreciate the fact that Mr. McFarlane must have been in a very difficult position at that moment to make that kind of choice. I hope...
The Air Force and NASA were blamed today for a $181 million mistake. The March 26th launch in a rainstorm of an Atlas Centaur rocket. The rocket carried a military communications satellite. It was struck by lightning and blew up. Today, investigators said Air Force weather forecasters made a bad call, and NASA should have known better. New developments today in the battle against AIDS. They centered on issues of public health and public morality. A federal agency called for increased voluntary testing for the AIDS virus, and the nation's largest city began an anti-AIDS advertising campaign of startling frankness. CBS News correspondent Richard Roth reports.
There's no way of
its creators say no advertising campaign on the danger of AIDS has talked as tough as this one.
If you're doing anything, you use one of these. You understand?
The print and broadcast ads shown off by New York City officials today are aimed mainly at heterosexuals, intended primarily to encourage the use of condoms as a way to prevent the spread of AIDS.
No.
And if he says no, so can you.
The Catholic Church called the commercials an endorsement of promiscuity, and so far only the city-owned TV station has agreed to run them.
Just as I'm concerned that some viewers will be concerned and be offended, I'm also concerned about the fact that there are thousands of people out there who are risking their lives who might otherwise be saved from a certain death.
And a similar concern is fueling debate nationwide over a new federal proposal to vastly increase the number of people tested for AIDS. Not to cure them of the disease, there is no known cure, but to keep them from spreading it.
I'm in some of the high-risk groups.
The proposal drawn up by the Centers for Disease Control says AIDS blood tests like the one this doctor was discussing with a patient today should be encouraged for anyone in a high-risk group, including people with venereal disease, intravenous drug users, and some pregnant women. But it calls routine mandatory AIDS testing not justified, an issue that's dividing some of the president's own advisors.
I think people who apply for marriage licenses, people who are admitted to hospitals, and others, we should have routine testing. And I still don't understand why we're not doing that.
Voluntary testing, easily accessible to all, with the appropriate counseling and with safeguards to ensure confidentiality, is good public health practice at the present time.
Opponents of wide-scale compulsory testing claim it would waste money and scare off many people who might be infected. The tests now are mandatory only for military and some other government personnel and for blood donors. But that's already enough to keep this Dallas AIDS testing lab, the nation's largest, busy on 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. Richard Roth, CBS News, New York.
A New York judge today sentenced makeup artist Stephen Roth to as much as 15 years in prison for hiring 2 men to slash model Marla Hanson's face with a razor blade. Prosecutors said Roth ordered the slashing after a rent dispute and the rejection of his romantic advances. The men convicted of carrying out the attack for Roth are due to be sentenced next month. Former Nazi Gestapo chief Klaus Barbie went on trial today in France. The 73-year-old Barbie is charged with crimes against humanity, torturing Jews and resistance fighters and deporting them to die in German concentration camps. In court today, he gave his name as Klaus Altmann, the identity he used when he fled to Bolivia after the war. A federal judge in Los Angeles today dropped all charges against 8 immigrants accused of belonging to a Palestinian terrorist group. The U.S. government was trying to deport them, but the judge ruled the order invalid. That case had brought protests from Arab American groups who said the Reagan administration was trying to stifle criticism of its Mideast policy. The Israeli cabinet is deadlocked tonight over what some Israelis see as a historic chance for peace and some others see as a death trap. The proposal is being pushed by Foreign Minister Peres. It is for an international conference leading to direct talks with the Arabs. Bob Simon is in Israel.
Israel is as divided now as it was over peace with Egypt or the war in Lebanon. Split down the middle, on the streets, in the inner sanctum of the Israeli government. Top cabinet officials met for 5 hours today. Foreign Minister Peres formally proposed a Middle East peace conference. Prime Minister Shamir opposed the idea. Nobody budged. The cabinet could agree on only one thing.
The cabinet will continue his deliberation on Wednesday. This is all.
Outside the Prime Minister's office, the shouting season had begun. At stake, whether to give up land for peace, parts of the West Bank of the Jordan captured in the '67 war, an issue so volatile that it could topple Israel's 30-month-old coalition government.
Yes, it may lead to our elections. I mean, if the government will be unable to take a decision, yes.
Supporters of Peres believe a unique opportunity has arisen, with Jordan's King Hussein ready to negotiate with no guarantees, with a new Soviet leader perhaps willing to play a constructive role, with a weakened PLO. This is a time to take risks.
If this specific government would miss this opportunity, it is a real pity.
But right-wingers are convinced an international conference would leave Israel alone and vulnerable to pressures to give up vast stretches of territory. Their slogan, International Conference, Recipe for National Suicide. Top Israeli officials say they've received a letter from Secretary Schultz, which endorses an international conference as the only practical way to continue the peace process, a process which in Israel has never seemed peaceful at all. Bob Simon, CBS News, Tel Aviv.